Sir, I'm telling you, the bracelet was in the case when I set it down. I didn't take anything.
Ma'am, he says it vanished right after you handled it.
And I understand how that looks, but I came in here to have the class fixed. That's all. I don't have any reason to steal from you.
The tag was cut. We keep the tags on
I didn't cut
everything.
anything. I don't even have scissors in my purse. Look, you can check.
Let's take a breath, both of you. We'll sort through this.
What would you do if you spent 22 years of your life defending your country only to be treated like a criminal in your own hometown? What would you do if the very freedoms you fought to protect were stripped away from you on an ordinary Tuesday morning, all because someone decided you didn't belong? Before we get started, where are you tuning in from? Drop your country or state in the comments. And hey, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, now's the time, because what's about to happen next will leave you speechless, and you won't want to miss stories like this. Ellie, as everyone called her, moved through her morning routine with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent decades in military hospitals where every second counted. She made her bed with hospital corners so tight you could bounce a quarter off them. She brewed her coffee strong and black, no sugar, no cream. She took her blood pressure medication, her cholesterol pill, and her vitamin D supplement, lining them up on the kitchen counter like little soldiers awaiting inspection. At 65, her body wasn't what it used to be. Her knees ached when it rained, her left hip had never been quite right since that fall in Kandahar, and her eyes needed reading glasses now for anything smaller than a billboard. But her mind was sharp as ever, and her spirit, well, her spirit had survived things that would have broken most people twice over. This particular Tuesday morning, Ellie had plans. Her grandson Marcus was graduating from middle school on Thursday, and she needed to pick up his gift from the jewelry store downtown. She'd ordered him a watch, a real one, with a leather band and his initials engraved on the back. It had cost her nearly $300, money she'd saved for months from her pension, but Marcus was worth it. That boy had worked hard, brought his grades up from C's to A's, and stayed out of trouble in a world that seemed determined to pull young black men into it. He deserved something special, something he could keep forever, and remember that his grandmother believed in him. Ellie showered, dressed in her favorite blue blouse and khaki pants, and spent a few extra minutes on her hair. She didn't go out much these days. Her social circle had shrunk considerably since her husband Raymond passed 4 years ago, but when she did go out, she liked to look presentable. She'd earned that much, she figured. She'd earned the right to hold her head high. By 9 o'clock, she was backing her silver Honda Civic out of the driveway. The car was 12 years old, paid off, and ran like a dream thanks to her meticulous maintenance schedule. Every 3,000 miles, oil change. Every 6 months, tire rotation. Every year, full inspection. The Army had taught her that taking care of your equipment meant your equipment would take care of you, and she applied that lesson to everything in her life. The drive into downtown Cedarbrook took about 15 minutes, winding past cotton fields that had been there since before the Civil War, past the old water tower with the town's name painted in faded letters, past the Baptist church where Ellie and Raymond had gotten married 41 years ago. Ellie drove the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2, eyes scanning the road the way she'd been taught. She wasn't in any hurry. The jewelry store didn't close until 6. And she had nowhere else to be. She found a parking spot on Main Street, right in front of Patterson's Hardware, about a block and a half from Davidson's Fine Jewelry. The parking meters in Cedarbrook were old-fashioned, the kind that took quarters, and Ellie fished in her purse for change. She found 2 quarters, slid them into the slot, and watched the meter click to 1 hour. That would be more than enough time. What Ellie didn't notice, as she locked her car and began walking down the sidewalk, was the patrol car parked across the street. She didn't notice the young officer inside watching her over the rim of his coffee cup, and she certainly didn't notice the way his eyes followed her, tracking her movements with a suspicion that had nothing to do with anything she'd done and everything to do with assumptions he had already made. Officer Derek Holloway was 26 years old and had been with the Cedarbrook Police Department for exactly 14 months. He'd grown up 2 towns over, in a place even smaller than Cedarbrook, and he'd wanted to be a cop since he was 8 years old. His father had been a cop. His grandfather had been a cop. It was in his blood, he liked to say, though what exactly that meant depended on who was asking. Derek was the kind of officer who believed he had good instincts, the kind who trusted his gut over procedure, the kind who saw patterns where others saw people. He'd never been formally reprimanded, but there had been conversations, gentle suggestions from his sergeant about community relations, reminders about implicit bias training, notes in his file that hadn't quite risen to the level of official complaints. On this particular Tuesday morning, Derek was bored. He'd been sitting in his patrol car for nearly an hour running radar on a street where nobody ever sped, drinking coffee that had gone cold, and scrolling through his phone between passing cars. When he looked up and saw Ellie Washington walking down the sidewalk, something in his brain, something that he would later insist was instinct, told him to pay attention. She was moving slowly, he noted, looking around. She paused in front of the hardware store and appeared to study something in the window. Then she moved on, passing the barber shop, the real estate office, the vacant storefront that used to be a bookshop. She didn't look like she belonged, Derek thought, though he couldn't have articulated exactly what belonging was supposed to look like. She was just out of place. That was the phrase he used later in his report, out of place. Ellie, meanwhile, was simply enjoying the morning. She'd paused at the hardware store because they had a display of garden tools in the window, and she'd been thinking about planting tomatoes this year. Raymond had always handled the garden, but maybe it was time she learned. At the barber shop, she had waved to old Mr. Jenkins through the glass, and he had waved back with the clippers still in his hand. At the real estate office, she'd noticed a new listing for a house on Maple Street and wondered idly who was moving. Small-town observations, nothing more. The innocent curiosity of a woman with time on her hands and nowhere particular to be. She reached Davidson's Fine Jewelry at 9:23. The store had been in the same location for over 50 years, run by the same family for 3 generations. Gerald Davidson, the current owner, had gone to high school with Ellie's younger brother. She'd known him for decades, had bought Raymond's wedding ring from his father, and purchased birthday gifts and anniversary presents and graduation watches from this very store more times than she could count. She pushed open the door, heard the familiar chime of the bell above it, and stepped into the cool, air-conditioned interior with a smile on her face. Behind her, Officer Derek Holloway was getting out of his patrol car. Gerald Davidson looked up from behind the counter and broke into a wide grin. "Ellie Washington, I was wondering when you'd come get that watch. It came in last week. Just beautiful. Marcus is going to love it." Ellie smiled back, feeling the warmth of genuine connection. "You know I couldn't wait any longer. That boy's been working so hard. I wanted something special." "Well, you picked a good one. Let me go get it from the back." Gerald disappeared through a doorway behind the counter, leaving Ellie alone in the store. She wandered over to a display case, looking at the earrings and necklaces without any real intention to buy. The prices were well beyond her pension, but it was nice to look, nice to imagine. The bell above the door chimed again. Ellie turned, expecting another customer, maybe someone she knew. Instead, she found herself looking at a police officer. Young, white, with a crew cut and a badge that caught the overhead light. His hand was resting on his belt, near his holster, and his expression was the kind of blank that she'd learned over 65 years of living in America usually meant trouble. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside." Ellie blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Outside, now. I need to ask you a few questions." "Questions about what? I'm just here to pick up something I ordered." "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. You match the description."
Ellie felt her heart rate increase, felt the old familiar tension creeping into her shoulders. She'd felt this before, too many times over too many years. The feeling of being seen and not seen all at once. Visible enough to be suspected, invisible enough to be dehumanized. "What description?" she asked, keeping her voice calm and level. "I've been coming to this store for 30 years. Gerald Davidson knows me. He's in the back right now getting my grandson's graduation present." "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. Step outside." Gerald emerged from the back room at exactly that moment, a small velvet box in his hands and confusion on his face. He looked at Ellie, then at the officer, then back to Ellie. "Derek, what's going on here?" "Mr. Davidson, please stay where you are. This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't. This is my store, and that's Ellie Washington. She's a customer, she's a friend. What exactly do you think she did?" Derek's jaw tightened. He didn't like being questioned, didn't like having his authority challenged, especially in public, especially by a civilian. "I received reports of someone matching her description behaving suspiciously on Main Street. I'm conducting an investigation." "Behaving suspiciously?" Her voice rose slightly despite her efforts to control it. "I was walking down a public sidewalk in broad daylight. What's suspicious about that?" "Ma'am, your tone—" "My tone is exactly appropriate for someone being accused of a crime she didn't commit. I am Eleanor Mae Washington. I am a retired United States Army nurse with 22 years of service. I served 3 tours overseas. I have a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart in a shadow box on my wall at home. I have never been arrested, never been charged with a crime, never so much as gotten a parking ticket, and I will not be treated like a criminal because I had the audacity to walk down the street in my own hometown." Something flickered in Derek's eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or maybe just irritation at having his narrative challenged. "I'm still going to need to see some identification." "Why? What probable cause do you have to demand my identification?" "I don't need probable cause. I'm conducting a consensual encounter." "Then I don't consent. I am a private citizen going about my lawful business. Unless you're detaining me, I have the right to go about my day." The air in the jewelry store had grown thick and heavy. Gerald stood frozen behind the counter, the velvet box still in his hands, and outside, through the plate glass window, a few passers-by had stopped to watch. Someone had their phone out, recording. Derek noticed this and felt his face flush. He was losing control of the situation. He was being made to look foolish, and something dark and defensive reared up inside him. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "You're being detained for investigation of suspicious activity. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Ellie felt the world tilt. "You're arresting me? For what?" "Resisting investigation. Failure to identify. Turn around." "This is insane. Gerald, call someone. Call the chief. Call someone." Gerald was already reaching for his phone, but Derek moved faster. "Sir, put that phone down. Do not interfere with a police investigation." He turned back to Ellie, reaching for her arm. "Ma'am, I will not ask you again." What happened next would be disputed for months to come. Derek claimed that Ellie pulled away from him aggressively, that she raised her arm in a threatening manner, that he had no choice but to use force to effect the arrest. Ellie maintained that she simply flinched, a reflexive response to being grabbed, and that Derek's reaction was wildly disproportionate. The video recorded by the bystander outside would eventually show the truth, but in that moment, all that mattered was the result. Derek grabbed Ellie's arm, twisted it behind her back, and forced her down against the display case with enough impact to crack the glass. Ellie cried out in pain as her shoulder wrenched in its socket. She felt the cold bite of handcuffs on her wrists, too tight, cutting into her skin. She heard Gerald shouting, heard the bell above the door as more people crowded in, heard the confused jumble of voices and the clicking of phone cameras. And through it all, she heard Derek's voice, steady and mechanical, reading her rights as though this were routine, as though he hadn't just thrown a 65-year-old woman against a display case hard enough to shatter glass. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Ellie closed her eyes and thought of the flag on her porch, thought of the uniform hanging in her closet, thought of the friends she'd lost in combat and the soldiers she held as they died. She'd given this country everything she had, and this was what she got in return. She'd defended freedom for 22 years, and now she was in handcuffs for walking while black in a town that had never quite decided whether she belonged. The ambulance arrived 11 minutes later, not for Derek, who was uninjured, for Ellie, whose shoulder had been dislocated by the force of the takedown and who was now sitting on the sidewalk, still handcuffed, tears streaming silently down her face. The paramedics wanted to take her to the hospital immediately, but Derek insisted she be transported to the station first, booked and processed before receiving medical care. It was protocol, he said, standard procedure. The paramedics exchanged looks, but didn't argue. They weren't paid to argue with cops. At the Cedar Brook police station, Ellie was photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell. Her shoulder screamed with every movement, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. She asked for medical attention 3 times and was told someone would be with you shortly. She asked to make a phone call and was told she could do so after processing. She asked what she was being charged with and was given a list that had grown mysteriously since the jewelry store: resisting arrest, assault on a police officer, disorderly conduct, and trespassing. Trespassing, she thought bitterly, in a store where she'd been a customer for 30 years. She was in that holding cell for 4 hours before anyone came to help her. The first visitor was not a doctor. It was Police Chief Maggie Thornton, a 53-year-old woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for running a tight ship. She'd been chief for 7 years, the first woman to hold the position in Cedar Brook's history, and she'd worked hard to build trust between the department and the community. When she heard what had happened, from Gerald Davidson, who had come to the station in person, and from the videos that were already spreading like wildfire across social media, she felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was bad. This was very bad.
Ellie was quiet for a long time. She thought about the young officer, Derek Holloway, with his crew cut and his certainty. She thought about all the Derek Holloways and all the police departments in all the towns across America. She thought about Marcus, 14 years old and growing taller every day, and what might happen to him the first time a Derek Holloway decided he looked suspicious. "What would I have to do?" she asked finally. Jasmine smiled, but it was a serious smile, not a triumphant one. "Tell your story, that's all. Just tell the truth about who you are and what happened to you. I'll handle everything else." And so Eleanor Mae Washington, who had never wanted to be famous, who had only wanted to pick up her grandson's graduation present, who had spent her whole life serving others without asking for recognition, became a symbol. The video of her arrest went viral, then supernova, then became the kind of cultural moment that gets its own Wikipedia page. News crews camped outside her hospital room, then her house. Politicians issued statements. Celebrities tweeted their support. The hashtag Justice for Ellie trended for 3 days straight. Officer Derek Holloway was placed on administrative leave the day after the arrest, then fired the following week, when a review of his body camera footage confirmed what the bystander video had shown. The body cam added details that the outside recording had missed. Derek's muttered comments as he followed Ellie down the street, his dismissive tone when Gerald vouched for her, the excessive force of the takedown, and most damningly, a comment he made after she was on the ground, handcuffed and crying, that he seemed to have forgotten the camera would pick up. A comment about how these people always played the victim. A comment that stripped away any pretense of good faith and revealed the ugly truth beneath. The charges against Ellie were dropped within 48 hours. The Cedar Brook City Council issued a formal apology. Chief Thornton announced a comprehensive review of department policies and mandatory additional training on implicit bias, de-escalation, and community policing. Gerald Davidson brought the watch to Ellie's hospital room personally, along with a bouquet of flowers and tears in his eyes.
"I'm so sorry," he said. "I should have done more. I should have stopped him." "You couldn't have stopped him," Ellie told him, and she meant it. Men like that don't stop until they're made to stop. 3 weeks later, her shoulder still in a sling and her heart still heavy, Ellie attended Marcus's graduation ceremony. She sat in the front row because the school had reserved a seat for her, and when Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he paused at the microphone. "I want to dedicate this diploma to my grandmother, Eleanor Washington. She's the strongest person I know. She served our country for 22 years, and last month she showed all of us what courage really looks like. Grandma, I love you, and I promise I'm going to make you proud." Ellie cried again, but this time they were different tears. The lawsuit was filed in federal court 6 weeks after the incident. Jasmine Carter and her team named Derek Holloway as a defendant, along with the Cedarbrook Police Department and the city of Cedarbrook. They alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. They demanded damages, both compensatory and punitive, but more importantly, they demanded systemic reforms, new training requirements, new hiring practices, civilian oversight boards, mandatory body camera policies with strict enforcement. The case took 18 months to resolve. 18 months of depositions and discovery, of motions and countermotions, of legal maneuvering that made Ellie's head spin. But Jasmine had been right about one thing. People were paying attention. Every development in the case made headlines. Every court appearance drew crowds. And slowly, incrementally, things began to change. Not just in Cedarbrook, but in towns across the state, across the region, across the country. Other departments looked at what had happened and decided they didn't want to be next. Other officers looked at Derek Holloway's ruined career and reconsidered their own behavior. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough, but it was a start. The settlement, when it finally came, was for $2.3 million. Ellie took the news quietly, without celebration. Money had never been the point. She donated half of it immediately, to veterans organizations, to civil rights groups, to a scholarship fund for students at the high school Marcus would attend in the fall. The other half she put in a trust for Marcus, for his education, for his future. She didn't need it. She had her pension, her little yellow house, her flag on the porch. She had what she'd always had, her integrity, her memories, her sense of self. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, Cedarbrook held a ceremony. The city had created a new award, the Washington Medal for Community Service, to be given annually to a local resident who demonstrated exceptional dedication to justice and public good. Ellie was the first recipient, and she was asked to give a speech. She stood at the podium in front of the city hall, looking out at a crowd of hundreds. She saw faces she recognized and faces she didn't. She saw black faces and white faces. She saw young people and old people. She saw Gerald Davidson in the front row, and Chief Thornton standing to the side, and Marcus sitting with his mother, beaming with pride. She took a deep breath and began to speak. 1 year ago, I was arrested on Main Street for the crime of walking while black. 1 year ago, I was thrown against a display case, handcuffed, and hauled to jail while my shoulder was dislocated and my dignity was shattered. 1 year ago, I wondered if anything I had ever done mattered, if 22 years of service, 3 tours of duty, a Bronze Star, and a Purple Heart meant anything in the country that could treat me that way. She paused, letting the silence settle. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how to fix 400 years of history. I don't know how to change hearts and minds overnight, but I know this. What happened to me was seen. It was recorded, it was believed, and because of that, things changed. Not enough things, not fast enough, but things changed, and that gives me hope. She looked directly at Marcus. To the young people in this crowd, I want to say this. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. Don't let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter. Don't let anyone convince you that change is impossible, because it's not. Change is happening right now, right here, because ordinary people decided they'd had enough. You have more power than you know. Use it. Use it wisely. Use it well. And never, ever let them convince you that you're not worthy of respect. She folded her papers and stepped back from the microphone. The applause was thunderous, but Ellie barely heard it. She was thinking about the road ahead, about all the work still left to do, about all the Eleanor Washingtons who didn't have someone with a camera phone nearby, who didn't have their stories believed, who didn't get settlements or medals or apologies. She was thinking about Derek Holloway, who was probably out there somewhere, convinced he'd done nothing wrong. She was thinking about the system that had created him, that was still creating others like him, that would keep creating them until something fundamental changed. But she was also thinking about Marcus, about the look on his face when he dedicated his diploma to her, about the man he was becoming, strong and smart and kind, about the future he would help build, different from the past, better than the present. And despite everything, despite the pain and the trauma and the long, hard year, Eleanor Mae Washington felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt hope. Marcus graduated from high school 4 years later, valedictorian of his class. He went to college on a full scholarship, then law school, then joined the Equal Justice Coalition, working alongside Jasmine Carter to fight for others the way they had fought for their grandmother. On the day he was sworn in as an attorney, Ellie sat in the front row, her shoulder long-healed, her spirit unbroken. She was 70 years old now, slower than she used to be, but her eyes were still sharp and her back was still straight. When Marcus walked over to hug her after the ceremony, she held him tight and whispered in his ear, "I'm so proud of you." "I learned from the best," he whispered back. Eleanor Mae Washington passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78 in the same little yellow house where she'd lived for 30 years. The flag on her porch had been replaced by then. Marcus had bought her a new one for her 75th birthday. But the spirit it represented was unchanged. She was buried with full military honors, her casket draped in the stars and stripes, her service remembered by speakers who came from across the country to pay their respects. But the tribute she would have treasured most came from Marcus, standing at her graveside on a warm Georgia morning, much like the one when everything had changed. "My grandmother," he said, "taught me that justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you fight for, every day, in small ways and large ways, with patience and persistence and an unshakable belief that tomorrow can be better than today. She didn't ask to be a symbol. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted to pick up a watch for her grandson's graduation. But when injustice found her, she didn't back down. She stood up, she spoke out, and she changed the world." He paused, looking at the flag-draped casket. "Rest easy, Grandma. We'll take it from here." And so the story of Eleanor Mae Washington came to an end. But the story she started continued on. In the laws that were changed, in the officers who were trained differently, in the young people who saw her example and decided to follow it, in the quiet conversations between parents and children about what it means to be brave, in the countless small acts of dignity and resistance that happen every day, in every town, whenever someone stands up and says, "Enough." This was a story about injustice, yes, but it was also a story about hope, about the power of one person to make a difference, about the way light can emerge from the darkest moments if we're willing to fight for it. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, then do me a favor. Don't just move on to the next video. Take a moment. Reflect on what you've heard. Think about what you can do in your own life, in your own community, to stand up for justice. And then do it. Because that's how change happens. One person at a time. One choice at a time. One act of courage at a time. If you want more stories like this, stories that matter, stories that make you think, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Leave a comment below and tell me what you thought of Eleanor's story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And remember,
You have more power than you know. Until next time.